early day to those of you that may be in the West. We're really appreciative of you being here. And on behalf of our board president, Shirley Holloway, our staff, and our field leaders and Alliance, we'd like to welcome you. And thank you for being here for this part 4 of our series on Help, Not Handcuffs. What I'd like to do is to now hand it off to our Chief Medical Officer and the moderator for today's Ask the Expert, our CMO, Chief Medical Officer, Dr. Ken Duckworth. Ken?
Thank you, Dan, and hello, everybody. I think you're going to love today's presentation. This represents kind of the culmination of what we've been trying to do in offering the best models in crisis care, alternatives to some of the outcomes that we've seen in the country. And so we've seen Steve Leifman's work and his whole team for jail diversion in Miami-Dade County, the leaders from Cahoots, the now nationally famous program from Eugene, Oregon. And last month we had leaders from Arizona and Georgia who have worked for years to put together a creative program of crisis diversion and one-stop shopping for finding help. Today, we're very fortunate to be traveling to St. Tammany Parish in Louisiana, where the food and music are optimal, and so is the community collaboration and creativity. One of the things that's important about this is this has a how-to dimension to it, and how they created it is remarkable. The 4 speakers today from this project are Nick Richard, who's been the executive director at NAMI St. Tammany since 2008. Then he'll be followed by his colleague, Tom Rowan, who's the project director and peer support specialist supervisor, who also came in 2008. I'm sure there's a story there. Judge Alan Zonbrecker, the 22nd Judicial District Court judge for this program, and he both does the mental health court and the assisted outpatient treatment court. And Mary Burkell, who's the director of the Safe Haven Project, who has a lot of community engagement experience that she brings to this project. So you'll see me again for the Q&A. We encourage your questions. We have an all-star team assembled from St. Tammany, and we welcome your input and questions. So Nick, you're going to lead off and then hand it to your colleagues. And again, I want to thank you for joining us today and teaching us about your work.
Thanks, Doc. As mentioned, my name's Nick Richard. I'm the executive director of NAMI in St. Tammany, and we're honored to take part in this series. And when I saw the rest of the lineup, I was a little bit more than honored. I was a little shocked, right? So when I see the work we all hear about the wonderful work that's going on in Miami and the work that's going on in Oregon. And I was shocked because the scope and size of these well-functioning systems is just really tremendous. And I wasn't shocked that we were included because I don't believe we have the skill there, but the scope and size is just so different. So again, I got to thinking, well, that's precisely the reason that we're here. St. Tammany Parish, we've all heard of Miami and Eugene, Oregon, but not many people have heard of St. Tammany Parish. We are, in fact, a small bedroom community of New Orleans, located just north of New Orleans. And again, we're a parish. That's just like you guys call them counties. We're the only state that has parishes. We are a very large geographical area. We have no public transportation, but the size and population of our community brings with it both difficulties and opportunities that larger communities do not have. There are many things that led to our crisis system, and no, I'm not going to go through each one of these, but as our presentation goes on, we're going to touch on quite a few of these things. My role here, especially in the beginning, along with my colleague Tom, is to talk about some of the key issues that led to the change in formation of our system. One of the first ones that happened was Hurricane Katrina. In 2005, Hurricane Katrina devastated Southeast Louisiana, taking lives and homes. While we're still accustomed to dealing with hurricanes in this particular part of the country, what we were not accustomed to and what we were not prepared for was the disaster that came a year and a half to 2 years after that. What happened was a massive community trauma resulting in sharp rising rates of completed suicides throughout our region. with that brought, it forced elected leaders to come together with community agencies, thrusting mental health into the spotlight into our community. This was one of the key jumping off points for mental health being a topic in St. Tammany Parish. Now I'm going to turn it over to Tom Rowan to talk about one of the second aspects. Tom?
It sees my camera not working, but I have been told I have a good face for radio, so maybe it's a blessing. I am Tom Rowan. I have been with NAMI since August of 2008. Since Dr. Duckworth said there was a story behind that, I'll say I came on board with NAMI 4 months before Nick Richard, our executive director. He always asked me to say that so that you will know that he is not responsible for me. Talking about Southeast Louisiana State Hospital, however, is something that I have so looked forward to being able to do. I spent 4 years at Southeast Louisiana State Hospital working for NAMI St. Tammany. It was literally 4 of the most enjoyable and rewarding years of my life. Southeast Louisiana Hospital was a very, very special place and had some very, very special people. But the thing about Southeast Hospital that is more special than anything else is how they embraced early on the SAMHSA recovery model and the behavioral health model of recoveries. Behavioral health model, of course, states that an understanding of the fact that most people with brain chemistry issues are co-occurring individuals, meaning that they probably have what were viewed as classic mental health issues, as well as substance abuse issues at the same time, and that if you don't treat them both, you're not effectively treating either one. Southeast Hospital was probably the only mental health facility in the state of Louisiana that fully embraced that and really did a wonderful job. I view the acute unit of Southeast Louisiana Hospital for adults as the primary behavioral health unit in the state of Louisiana, the first one that fully embraced that concept. As far as the SAMHSA recovery model, of course, that's stated very simply. You know, in the old days, if I walked into an acute unit as a client, or what they used to call patients, right? But if I was the client in an acute unit in a hospital under the old medical model, there would have been somebody in that hospital whose first name was Doctor, and that man whose first name was Doctor would have known what was best for me, what I wanted, what my goals should be, what my treatment should be, and he would tell me, and my job would be to listen. The SAMHSA recovery model turned that on its head. And it said indeed that if I walked in as a client in an acute unit or in a hospital setting, that in the treatment team, the most important member of that treatment team would be me, not the doctor. It's not that the doctor wouldn't be important, but it recognized that I am the one who knows the most about me. I know my history. I know my wants and my needs. I pretty well can tell people what has worked for me in the past and what has not worked. And as such, that makes me the most valuable member of that team. Southeast Louisiana State Hospital fully embraced that. And as a matter of fact, along with that, they embraced NAMI principles and the principles of peer support. Again, I've been with NAMI for 13 years. My very first job with NAMI was on an acute unit of a psychiatric facility that was Southeast Louisiana Hospital. I was actually the first person in the state of Louisiana to serve as a peer support specialist in an adult acute unit. We didn't call them peer support specialists at that time because the peer support movement was just getting started. We were actually called client and family liaisons. And what we were charged with when we were hired was to offer education, support, resources, and advocacy to the clients in the hospital. And I know those words ring with every member of NAMI. education, support, resources, and advocacy. If that isn't familiar, then you haven't been around NAMI very long. Southeast was a remarkable place, very, very complete campus in terms of what they offered in behavioral health treatments. There were adult acute units, adolescent acute units, residential housing. The Southeast Hospital served more than 200 individuals on site at various levels of care, from acute care to intermediate care. Intermediate care, I might add, I'm kind of proud of that term. Prior to the SAMHSA recovery model coming in play and the idea of recovery language being important, those units which we renamed intermediate units were known as long-term units. Wouldn't it be a terrible thing to be a client going into a hospital and being told that you were going into a long-term unit? Talk about take the hope away from people immediately. The idea of intermediate unit is so much more positive. It suggests that there's something else at the end of the tunnel. The embrace of peer support services by Southeast was extraordinarily important. And as far as peer support services at Southeast and in Louisiana and their history and how they coincide, both NAMI St. Tammany and Southeast Louisiana Hospital developed peer support services when they were in their infancy in the state of Louisiana. You know, NAMI itself, when you talk about peer support and the peer support model, NAMI should recognize that very well, because when you think about it, all of the NAMI signature programs are based on the idea of peer support, whether it's peer-to-peer stuff or family-to-family stuff. It's peers helping peers and modeling different stages of recovery and answers in their lives. That, of course, though, is a volunteer-based organization and a volunteer-based protocol. What Southeast wanted to see, what NAMI St. Tammany wanted to see, and what the state of Louisiana wanted to see was professional peer support services. And of course, moving into the idea away from volunteerism into professionalism, where you have paid peer support services, that requires certain things, and it all starts with specialized training. The state of Louisiana, when they finally decided to certify peer support services, engaged the services of Recovery Opportunity Center, also known as RI Consulting, out of Arizona. They provided a 72-hour or 2-week-long training for peer support specialists, which serves still today as the training that most peer support specialists in Louisiana receive. There is another outfit that provides training as well, but I have to say that Recovery Opportunity Center's training, in my view, is far superior. NAMI St. Tammany also recognized, however, that the state of Louisiana, even to this day, doesn't have a well-defined organization on a state level that licenses and regulates peer support specialists. So we on our own developed some important things, because I think one of the things that designates a professional or a profession is that that profession will have a code of ethics. NAMI St. Tammany has developed a code of ethics, principles of practice, and a statement of core functions that I think would rival any professional organization that you could name. I might add that we owe a great deal in our principles of practice development to NAPS, the National Association of Peer Supporters, which was formerly known as INAPS, International Association of Peer Support Specialists. But we do have those 3 documents, and certainly anybody who's interested in receiving copies of those, we do share, and our contact information is available at the end of this presentation, and we'll be glad to furnish those to anyone who's interested. NAMI St. Tammany has been a significant employer of peer support specialists, We typically average at any time between 9 and 13 full-time peer support specialists employed in various modalities. Right now, we employ 10, and within the next couple of months, we envision employing as many as 14. We've always been, if not the largest employer of peer support specialists in the state of Louisiana, certainly right up there close to the top. In the court system, which of course we're dealing with significantly in today's presentation, our peer support specialists deliver things that are very, very important to defendants or court clients as we view them, and that would be mutuality and confidentiality. It is really important, we think, for the peers to go into the court system and let the defendants know that anything that they say to us is confidential and won't be passed on to judges or probation officers or even clinicians, unless, of course, it's something that involves them being a danger to themselves or others. At that point, of course, we're mandated reporters. But it's very important in the court system for that confidentiality and mutuality to take place. And frankly, that's a difficult thing for certain segments of the court system to accept initially. But the 22nd Judicial District courts have been very, very successful in accepting that. Talking again about Southeast Hospital, if I may, unfortunately in 2012, we had a very common experience that at that time that we share with a lot of people throughout the country, because Southeast Louisiana Hospital was closed. And I know at that time, 2012, throughout the country, hospitals and residential programs were closed, unfortunately, in many cases for political reasons. It was a big move to cut costs in state government and lower taxes. And that's what was really important and certainly was paramount in Louisiana at the time. And of course, when hospitals and other resources are closed down, we're always promised that community resources are going to appear as replacements, and they're going to be better than what was left, and nothing is really going to be lost. No beds will be lost, no housing will be lost, no resources will be lost. But unfortunately, as most of us know, those promises are very rarely delivered. And in Louisiana, I can tell you that unfortunately they weren't delivered. The closing of Southeast Hospital was a tragic event that I still mourn. Literally, right before the closing of the hospital had received an audit by the Joint Commission, which referred to Southeast Louisiana Hospital as a beacon of light in the darkness of mental health care. And within months of receiving that audit from an agency whose business was not praising hospitals, it was finding what was wrong with them. So after being called a beacon of light in the darkness of mental health coverage, the hospital was closed for political reasons. It is unfortunately something I know that a lot of folks are, an experience that's shared by a lot of folks listening to this presentation. The political reason, of course, was that privates are supposed to be better than publics in providing services. And what we all know is that private hospitals and other private agencies are not better or worse than state-run agencies. They're just different. And this isn't a knock on private hospitals that perform a great service, but public hospitals like Southeast Hospital perform services that private hospitals can't, because they're beholden to their stockholders and they're there to make a profit. And that's why often people are discharged from units when they still need extra time in those units to recover and can't be afforded it. So again, it's just one of those things. I mourn for Southeast Hospital, and I mourn for the loss of resources throughout the country. Both St. Tammany Parish and the 22nd Judicial District courts stepped up and really helped, though, when Southeast closed. One of the things that has been traditional in this area. The 22nd Judicial District Courts have always had specialty courts which have assisted people with behavioral health issues, whether it's behavioral health court, AOT, or the drug courts. You see a picture there of the late Judge Peter Garcia. It was my privilege to work 4 years with Judge Garcia when I was behavioral health court case manager for that period of time. He died last year, and it's a loss that I still feel and I mourn. He was one of the most brilliant men I've ever met, and he was dedicated to the field of behavioral health and mental health. And his loss is felt not only in the court system, but in the behavioral health system in our state and throughout the country. Judge Garcia was well known. Judge Garcia started behavioral health court and started drug courts in our area. We're very happy that in his stead in behavioral health court, Judge Alan Zornbracker has taken over. And Judge Zornbracker not only has taken over behavioral health court, but also AOT court. And both of those are very, very important modalities. And Judge Zornbracker is more capable than I am of talking. But before he speaks, I just want to say this about the judges in the 22nd Judicial District Court. These men and women deserve our thanks day and night. The judges who serve in these specialty courts serve on their own time. They volunteer their time. All of them have very, very busy dockets, and they don't have to do this, but they do it because they recognize the need. Judge Garcia did that, and Judge Zornbracker continues in that tradition. And I am very, very pleased to turn the presentation over at this time to Judge Zornbracker.
All right, thank you, Tom. I appreciate it very much. So what is our solution? We're not saying that how we do it is the only way to do it. We're not saying it's the best way to do it, but we're saying that this is how we do it, and this is a method that has frankly met with some success. It starts basically, of course, with two things, hard work and money. And by hard work, it's not just for the hands-on providers to the participants in our specialty courts. It's building relationships, building partnerships with every stakeholder, even those that may only be peripheral, but when you need them and you need their help in your particular court, behavioral health or AOT or drug court, whatever it is, they're there. And I'm going to list a few of those that maybe you haven't thought of. Some of them, of course, you have. The prosecution, a district attorney, we call it. You may call it the prosecuting attorney. Public defenders, court administration. We have a specialty court coordinator that oversees all our specialty courts. And we have case managers, program managers for the individual specialty courts. Probation in behavioral health court, they're probably more important than the district attorney. All aspects of treatment, anyone that provides the services, some of them specialized, some of them general, that we need in this area, you need to establish a relationship with them. Transportation services. Transportation is so often a problem with people. They can't get to their screen. They can't get to their counseling session. Communications experts. You know, today with email and Zoom, everything is instant. Everything is, instant communication. You need a specialist in communication, a tech person. Housing assistance. I mean, at this level, one of the first things we've got to make sure is that they've got a place to lay their head at night, because that isn't always the case, and you have to have somebody on hand. Obviously, local or regional mental health advocates, assistance programs, and then also on the financial end that I'm going to get to, a grant specialist, someone who can help you seek money, and of course the judiciary. And as Tom said, when you get elected judge the 22nd, there's not a question about whether you're going to handle a specialty court. You're going to handle a specialty court. That's how we operate. and we embrace them. We'll swap them occasionally every 3 or 4 years. You know, I may take reentry court or drug court or family preservation court or veterans court, but you know, you're going to stay involved. We also have what's called a crisis intervention unit with the St. Tammany Parish Sheriff's Office. These are specially trained officers who are called when it is apparent that there is a mental health issue involved. And initially there were 4 or 5 officers that received training, and then the rank of those officers went for additional training and became instructors in crisis intervention for the officers. And now they can instruct and certify officers. All officers receive some crisis intervention training, but for the crisis intervention team, they receive an enhanced level of training. And now we have 2 instructors who can certify people as being trained in crisis intervention, and they train not only the St. Tammany Parish Sheriff's Office, but other law enforcement agencies around our district. You need to have a relationship with someone who can perform medical assessments, because so often, you know, there's an underlying medical problem that because of their mental illness or because of their addiction, they're not taking care of themselves, and things that can be taken care of. Diabetes, for example. We have a person in AOT, which is assisted outpatient treatment that I'm going to get to in some detail, who has treatable, controllable diabetes, but because of the mental illness, doesn't take care of himself. And sometimes that's as big a problem as his underlying mental condition. The clerk of court, you have to have a relationship with the clerk of court, because so many things you need served and delivered and so forth to satisfy the legal process. You need to have a relationship with a public benefits specialist who can direct the participants in your court with regard to Social Security disability, Medicare, Medicaid, any other form of public assistance for which they might be eligible that can help their overall status. You need somebody. Local and state legislators. I was telling Nick earlier, we have a situation where they're trying to amend one of the bills that pertains to our specialty courts. And you have to have a relationship with your local and state legislators to be able to call them and say, hey, we've got a problem with this and we need your help on this. And another public official that we have a relationship with that's very important to us is the coroner. Now, I know in many states, probably every other state, the coroner doesn't have anything to do with mental health issues, but in Louisiana, they're critical. And I'm sure wherever you are, they have some public official that serves that function. And I'm talking about for temporary restraining and things, but for AOT court, again, which I'm going to get to, the coroner is instrumental in concurring that this person is someone who needs the services of assisted outpatient treatment. So establish long-term relationship, get them invested in your court, in your program. So when you call, they're happy to, and they're proud to say, hey, you know, we help the behavioral health court. All right. The second thing is money. And by money, I mean, it can be money, it can be services, you know, volunteer services or donated services. You know, Tom mentioned earlier, no lunch Wednesdays. And this was a phrase that Judge Garcia coined. And we have people that come in, they give up their lunch hour on Wednesdays. At 12 o'clock, we staff every participant in behavioral health court. And at 1 o'clock, they come in and stand in front of the court. And, you know, I ask them, you know, how are you doing? Did you make work this week? You missed a screen on Tuesday, and so on and so forth. So, you know, volunteer services are important, but you need to identify any funding source or services that are available. And that's why I mentioned a grant specialist, someone who has, you know, experience in filing these grant applications can help fund these courts. And, you know, I can tell you that SAMHSA gave us a sizable grant to start our AOT court. Without it, we couldn't do it. But there are other sources available. Our Supreme Court has a fund that supports many of our specialty courts. And we have a North Shore, because that's the area that we're called, North Shore of New Orleans. Court Foundation, and they do tremendous work to help support a number of causes, but particularly our specialty courts. If you have somebody in your jurisdiction that's a real go-getter and wants to make a difference and wants to change things, get them to start a court foundation. You know, people often are willing to give to a foundation when they know it's going to be for good things. They may not know what a particular court does or understand it, but they say, look, they're supporting these specialty courts, they're supporting this cause or that cause, and if it's done right, it can be very, very beneficial. So what are our models? What do we do? And I'm going to start with BHC, and I'm going to have to go pretty quickly because time's going to get short on me. We, of course, have a specialty court coordinator to oversee all our specialty courts. I think we actually have 9 because we have multiple divisions of some. And we have a case manager for every specialty court who handles the day-to-day operations, the contact with the participants and the service providers. They put out fires. We have 50 people in behavioral health court, and that's the maximum we're allowed to have. The case manager helps perform evaluations and assessments to see if they're appropriate. And where do we get our referrals? Well, of course, we get them from a number of sources. Other judges who have people come into their courtroom that they believe might be appropriate for behavioral health court, they send them for assessment. Probation is a source. Pretrial services. We have a program where we try to identify shortly after arrest those that may benefit from pretrial services. They may be eligible for a specialty court. They may be eligible for diversion. They may be eligible for something that gets them treatment, gives them a chance, keeps them out of jail. And then, of course, attorneys, not only the district attorney, but private attorneys see individuals and say, hey, I believe this person would be appropriate for one of the specialty courts. They're assessed. They cannot have committed a crime of violence or a sex crime. We've fudged a little bit on the crime of violence because there's a couple of crimes that are technically called crimes of violence, but aren't, like aggravated obstruction of a highway or something like that is a crime of violence. But, you know, if it's not a terrible crime and they're appropriate otherwise for our specialty court, we will admit them. For the behavioral health court, of course, they must have a history of mental illness. They must be competent to stand trial and to understand what they're doing. But they must have a history of mental illness. Now, what is a history? Well, it could be treatment. It could be medication. It could be a diagnosis. It could be hospitalization. It could be a temporary commitment, or it could be something in medical records. Sometimes an internist or a GP will note something that provides a history of mental illness, but there has to be something. They can't just say, oh, by the way, I've been depressed since I was 14, and you know, that's why I robbed the bank, or that's why I was drunk while I was driving. They can't do that. Now, once accepted into behavioral health court, we run them in phases: phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, and phase 4. After phase 3, it's what's called graduation, and phase 4 is really completion, and where we just monitor them for a month. Phase 1, it usually lasts 2 to 3 months. They come in every week before the court at 1 o'clock on Wednesdays, where we give up our lunch and I ask them the questions. And I could tell you during COVID, it was tough because everything was Zoom, a lot of technological issues, a lot of communication problems, and we really felt the difference. But when they're face to face and they come into the court, and you know, the bailiff says, "All rise," and you know, you walk out in the robe, and they stand in front of you alone with all their peers. And it's a closed courtroom except for the people in the program. And you say, why did you miss your screen last Tuesday? Or why were you 10 minutes late, you know, for your individual session last Thursday? And there's a reward system if they do something good. You know, you reward them. We have a funny little thing called a cookie jar, and there's a bunch of slips of paper in there. And if they do something good, it doesn't have to be necessarily in the program, but let's say they're observed with some random act of kindness. And we've had things like, you know, I saw Jimbo changing a tire in the parking lot when he left, you know, for this lady, or something like that. They do something. We like to reward them because they like they like that. It's little things. You know, it can be as little as, well, you get to go first and leave early next week. You know, you get to skip a week if they're doing really well. And on the other end, we have a sanctions spectrum, as you see on the board. You know, if you're on regular parole and you commit some of these violations, you get revoked and you go to jail. That's the very last thing we want to do in behavioral health court. You know, we'll give them community service. We'll give them write an essay on the importance of compliance. You know, we have workbooks that we can give them. You know, if it gets severe, we might give them a weekend in jail or even a week in jail. And then as a last resort would be revocation and expulsion from the program. The goal with regard to sanctions that we have is consistency. And at that, we fail miserably because each individual is different. And you can't look at one little snapshot in time and say, well, they really messed up here and I'm going to, you know, I've got to do this. You know, you look at how they've done the whole time. What's their pattern? You know, what's different now than 3 months ago? So it's a really specialized and difficult sometimes a process of sanctioning. I have to speak briefly. Nick, do I have a couple more minutes?
Yes, sir.
Okay. AOT and assisted outpatient treatment. This was, of course, Judge Garcia's baby. About 3 years ago, he asked me to take over behavioral health court because he wanted to dedicate his time to assisted outpatient treatment. The big difference between AOT and BHC is that AOT is a purely civil proceeding. It has nothing to do with the criminal process, and it can't. These are for, this program is for the more severe mentally ill individuals, those that just have repeatedly shown that they are unable to comply with treatment recommendations. But the process has no teeth. In other words, they're not going to go to jail. They're not going to be held in contempt. But what we do is, by court order, we have them examined. We have a written treatment plan developed for them. We meet with them periodically. We haven't reached the point yet where we can get them to come in face to face on a weekly basis, but we're working for that. There are only a few of these courts in the country. And of course, I know San Francisco's got one, New York has one, but for us, you know, the 22nd JDC, which it's 100 miles from the northwest corner of one parish to the southeast corner of the other parish that we serve, and we have about 350,000 residents in this. And sometimes the distance is a little daunting. It's a very diverse district too. You know, close to the lake, close to the south and the east, and close to New Orleans. It is truly a bedroom community. But you get 15 miles north, it is as country as it gets. And believe me, implementing programs to that diverse population is difficult. The process basically is a healthcare provider or an individual with the concurrence of the coroner who believes this person, based on their failure to comply with treatment, would be appropriate for AOT, files a petition with the court. The court requires an examination within 10 days of filing of the petition, and a hearing is held within 18 days of the filing. And again, the person comes, and if the proof is presented, and if the court believes that they're appropriate, he orders a written treatment plan be provided, and will approve the written treatment plan. And then periodically that person comes back in, and we determine whether or not they're complying with the program, if the program needs to be amended somehow, and you know, if so, there's lawyers involved. And when we first started the AOT program, you know, Nick and I made the circuit with the local newspapers and radio shows and things like that. And the response was, how can I help? How can I volunteer. We had social workers, we had attorneys, we had other, individuals to say, how can I help? So, take advantage of all that. How are we doing? Well, I can tell you this, that it's too early to tell with AOT because we've only been doing it 5 months. But we do know now that the sickest person in behavioral health court is healthier than the healthiest person in AOT. These are severely ill individuals that require much more attention at every level of the court. In BHC, you measure success, are they in treatment? Are they taking their medication? Do they have suitable living conditions? Are they employed? Have they avoided any criminal activity? In AOT, the first level of success is they're still alive. They're still alive. And after that, are they compliant with their treatment? Are they compliant with their meds? Are they stable in their home environment? Employment is really not considered unless it's sheltered employment. So, we have successes, and it's a little difficult to compare completion and graduation rates for BHC or recidivism rates. Recidivism is measured if 3 years after graduation, if the person hasn't reoffended, then they're if they do get arrested within 3 years, they're considered to in that statistic. We just got the stats last week from the Supreme Court, and the recidivism rate for all our specialty courts is 10.8%. That means nearly 90% of the people who complete our program don't reoffend within 3 years. And I just think that's a remarkable number. Not only if you compare it to the rate of recidivism in the general population, but if you compare it to the rate of recidivism in the general population with mental illness, I think it's even more remarkable. Another quick effect that I believe these courts have had, for reasons that still escape me, St. Tammany Parish has been a center of suicide. We've had a high suicide rate. And especially for Louisiana, I don't understand. We're a wealthy community. We have good infrastructure. We have good schools. We have good medical treatment. But within the last 5 years, we've led the state in the percentage of suicide, and then it started to go down a little bit. In the last 2 years, it's dropped even more. So we're no longer in the top. I think we're still in the top 5, but it's still going down. It's clearly pointed in the right direction. And again, it's impossible to measure with any mathematical certainty, how these courts have saved our public health system in terms of dollars. We know it's been substantial, and it frees up those dollars more and makes them more available for the underserved. Now, again, it's impossible to measure our success on the effect that it's had on the families, because these people have dealt with their child, their sibling, their parent who's been mentally ill for years and years, and when they're better, the gratitude that the families and the clients, the participants show us is very gratifying. For many of our graduates, this is the first time they've been successful at anything in their whole life, and they come back months and years later on Wednesday at 1 o'clock, because that's when they came, to thank us again and to tell the people that are there what kind of impact it had. Well, look, I'm sorry if I went over. I appreciate it very much, and now I will turn it over to Mary.
Thank you so much, Judge John Burke. I appreciate it. So my name is Mary Burkell, and I am the director of Safe Haven, and I am a parish government employee. So Safe Haven, a lot of times they have a misconception. A lot of times here in Louisiana, when people see Safe Haven, they think it's an organization, but in reality, it's a campus and it's a parish project. And really how this whole project started was the closure of the state hospital, Southeast Louisiana Hospital. As Tom mentioned, this hospital had a very rich history here in our region and in our state. It was built in the 1950s. It was the third state mental hospital when it opened. And I give many tours of the current site now that we renamed it Safe Haven. And it's amazing to hear the different stories. Everyone has a story about Safe Haven, whether it's coming to visit a loved one or talking about our former governor who spent some time here while he was governor. Everyone has some kind of connection to Safe Haven and its legacy. I remember that day when that closure was announced. And while I would never really had as large of a connection or spent as much time as Tom did, it was devastating for everyone because of that legacy of service, because of the great services that we provided out there, and it really was a beacon for the region. So when we talk about this project, there's a lot of moving parts going on at the same time. So one, we have the creation of the specialty courts. That's a huge part of this overall story. And really the court system going in there and starting to identify and really starting to say, hey, we have problems here. And these are some of the things that we're working on to solve them. Some of the other, with our sheriff's office, them stepping up too with the CIT program that we already mentioned. But another thing that really laid that foundation and that groundwork for the relationships to be built to make these types of projects possible was the Suicide Prevention Task Force, which was started in 2010 in response to that large suicide rate we had in St. Tammany. When that statistic came out, it was a real wake-up call, I think, for a lot of us here in St. Tammany who sometimes maybe didn't always know what was going on in the behavioral health system or people who were living with behavioral health. And when those statistics came out, our then parish president, Kevin Davis, formed this committee, and he took people, experts from all different areas. So from NAMI, of course, was very much involved, our community foundation, United Way, Volunteers of America, and our crisis line. And really what this group kind of did is put us on that beginning path of parish government being one of those other partners when we talk to behavioral health. And from this came a media campaign to try to destigmatize behavioral health, and as well as starting to fund programs to address this issue because we knew it was so important. So when that announcement came in 2012, we already had some of that education had already been done. So when that announcement came, we knew how badly that would affect us as a parish. So a couple things went into action. And so there's a couple different parts. One being the actual paperwork, the other finances, and then the relationships. So the relationships we have already starting working together, admitting it's a problem. So as far as the paperwork goes, it took us 3 years for our local government to actually purchase the property. So it was announced in June of 2012. In the meantime, the parish entered into some agreements with the Department of Health and Hospitals, as well as a private hospital to take over that acute care. So that gave us time to actually purchase the property and work those little technical parts out with the state. So through that, y'all see it was officially bought in March of 2015. So while this whole process was going on and while that official sale was going on, they went back to the idea of a task force, bringing people together from all different types of the parish, from all different organizations to really talk about what should our system be like and how can Safe Haven be a part of that improvements. So the major contribution was a study that was done, which we call Transforming the St. Tammany Behavioral Health System, which was done in partnership between the Louisiana Public Health Institute and the National Council for Behavioral Health. And really the purpose was to figure out where we are today, what can be done to improve, and then to start collecting data, to start to have a dashboard so we can get further along in this process. And there was 4 recommendations that came out of that. 1, enhance existing behavioral health services, transform the utilization of emergency services. We were very much overutilizing emergency room services, enhance the crisis service continuum, and then also the advocacy, education, and training opportunities. So this was our foundation as we move forward. So let me tell you about the financial side. So if you look on your screen, you see a map of it. So the parish in the initial purchased 293 acres. It was a huge mammoth sized property, and it was a total purchase price of $15 million. And then after that, we decided the parish government really doesn't need 293 acres. So we broke different pieces off. So we broke some pieces off to Pelican Park, which is our neighbor, who was one of our recreation districts. We both broke pieces off to a private hospital so that they could continue to take over those acute care services. And as you see through those two sales, we actually were able to recoup about half of that original purchase price. And I'm sure as you're thinking, if you're somewhere else, I can't imagine how thinking about going to a local government agency and saying, we need to find, $11 million or whatever that initial investment is. So I really wanted to tell you how we made that work. My biggest recommendation is to know your local government's budget and to really understand it. With local governments, a lot of times they have their general fund that they can use more relaxed, and it's a little bit more flexible, but then they had dedicated funding sources. So we were able to use both. We did not fully use our general fund for this project. So we used road and drainage money. We used, and we also have here a public health millage, and that was great. Something that else came out from that suicide prevention task force that really gave us the ability to purchase the property. So as you see from each of those accounts, we took different amounts of money based on how much that was. Then we have the subsequent sales, which you see is about half of that purchase price. So what did we end up with? What did we actually truly pay at the end of the day when all those sales were done? So we used about $2 million of our public health millage. We did use some building general funds, about $5 million. We used road funds because that campus had about 9 acres of roads on it. So those became parish roads. So we used about $500,000 for that. Here in Louisiana, we have a lot of wetlands. And so we created our own wetland mitigation bank. So when we do construction projects, we don't have to buy credits from other entities. So some of that project bought some of the land as well. And then we also sold some of the land for a project we were doing for an additional bypass road. So as you can see, it's a lot easier to swallow and to make it work the $5 million investment of the general funds rather than that full $15 million that you saw at the beginning. And we couldn't do this without our partners. While a lot of the financial burden has been on parish government, we are not the experts. We are not healthcare agency. And I say that all the time because I think it's so important to remind. It takes every one of our partners to make this work, from our sheriff's office, our 22nd JDC, our district attorney, the coroner's office. NAMI is one of our biggest partners. Florida Parish's Human Service Authority, which is our human service authority for our region, and our 2 hospitals here in St. Tammany. They're the ones that really made us be able to continue, not just to purchase the property, but then develop it into something else. So after we purchased it, we came and had a vision for it. So all of our partners contributed to this vision, and that's to have a collaborative healing environment. That's really important for us, to keep those relationships at the center of this project. And the other thing we focus on is the full continuum of care, from crisis to wraparound recovery services all the way through. We want to make it kind of like a one-stop shop. So there's a couple things we're going to try to make sure we address, some of our objectives and goals. Making sure it's a healing environment. The state was not really able to upkeep the campus or the facilities. And we know that this is important. The environment you're in really does affect the way you feel about yourself and the way you think others think about you. So that's going to be something that we continually work on, renovating the space, plantings, all that has to be part of it. We want to expand access to care. We want emergency room diversion. As you see here in St. Tammany, we had over 2,000 unnecessary emergency room visits. And also jail diversion, obviously, working with our court system, working with our sheriff's office and DA, making sure that we're decriminalizing behavioral health. Organizational framework. We already had that informally, but this project helped us to do in a way that no matter who is in these positions in these organizations, we can continue to work together. information management data is so huge these days and will continue to be to help really direct us where to go. And then obviously if it's not financially sustainable, then it's not sustainable at all. Our current parish president, Michael Cooper, and our councilmen have really been behind this. And I think that's a lot because of our partners. Our partners continue to talk about it. They don't take their foot off that gas pedal as far as making sure that this continues to be a priority with parish government. So now that we've purchased the property, what is parish government's current role? One, we're a property owner. So we actually rent out space to service providers. So we are not providing those services. These entities, such as NAMI, such as our school board, a START Corporation, and Florida parishes, they all have services there on campus. But we also have relationships beyond that with our fire departments, with the VA, as we expand those services in the future. But also financial support. So we've gotten through the purchase of the property, but on a daily basis, how do we pay for this campus? So one, I call it the bricks and mortar. How do we make sure the lights turn on and that we can sweep the floor? That's through two sources. One, the rent from the revenues. So those service providers are actually investing back in the campus and in this vision, but also our public health millage. We're very fortunate to already have that in place and to be able to do that. My goal is to one day, and I think it's realistic, we'll be completely off the public health millage as far as the bricks and mortar of the project. For capital improvement, so getting all those infrastructure, all the facilities back up to snuff, we're looking at grants mostly from state and federal. And last, to fund the services will be through Medicaid and private insurance. So will this really work? Will that philosophy really work? Well, we have one example, which is our NAMI Day Center. This house used to be the former CEO's house on campus. That position lived on campus. So we took the house, the parish invested community development block grant money. Then NAMI went out and got startup costs from Baptist Community Ministry, a grant to begin those services, which was all peer support. And then now they're also getting CDBG money for some operations, but also looking at Medicaid and actually being able to charge for that. So where are we going in the future? Number one is our crisis line. Our regional crisis line is looking to relocate to the campus. We are soon to be opening a crisis receiving center, so we have everyone in one area. But that's mostly for adults. We want to make sure we don't forget about our adolescent and children. We want to make sure we have crisis services, outpatient treatment, and really been talking with our court system, the need for supervised visitation and safe exchange to try to prevent some of that trauma that has in early childhood. We also have a huge veterans population here in St. Tammany, so we're looking at residential houses and wraparound treatment programs. And then also, of course, workforce training, transportation, health and wellness. That will all be a part of our future as we move forward. Nick, I'm going to throw it back to you.
Thanks, Mary. And we're rolling into the end here. And the biggest part, as we close this up is, no, you don't need a hospital to close in your community, and you don't need parish government necessarily to put forward funds. What you need is relationships. And at NAMI, that's what we're here to do. We're here to convene conversations. We're here to help relationships move forward. So I hope that we were able today to show you how a smaller community, an everyday community, can take really what was a tragedy in our community and turn that around to try and meet the needs of people living with mental illness throughout our community. Thank you for having us. Doc?
Well, this is great. We have a lot of questions, and we're going to take them away. The first question relates directly to what you were just saying, Nick. How do I get this going in my community? So you mentioned relationships, but it sounds like it's multi-year, multi-party relationships as well.
Doc, I'll tell you, I started this job when I was in my late 20s, and I came in looking at the mental health system, and I was actually frustrated with the judiciary and frustrated with law enforcement. And, in time over the next couple of years and spending time with them, where I should have been frustrated really was honestly with myself as an advocate in the mental health system. And what I learned over time is the individuals that I've come in contact with that are on here now, and there's many other people that we worked with throughout the court system, throughout our law enforcement agencies and parish government. It's our role as advocates to bring forward the information necessary and the tools necessary to give them to help them understand not only where the gaps are, but where we can possibly be as a community. So I would say, yes, of course, it takes time to build these relationships, but most importantly, as an advocate, you have to be willing and willing to hear other people's concerns before you tell them how they need to do things.
Thank you. This is a question for Tom. Tom, let's talk a little bit about the training of peer specialists, both how it's funded, I think that was mentioned, but also how much training occurs and how somebody knows when they're certified. Like, how do you know when you're a peer specialist?
Well, certainly that varies by state. Now, in Louisiana, which is the only one that I can really speak to, again, the model is an intensive 72-hour training to begin with for folks who have no background, whatever. And it's interesting that they call it a 72-hour training, because the 72 hours actually constitutes in classroom time. There probably is an additional 20 to 25 hours of extra work that goes into the testing and whatnot prior to graduation from that quote unquote 72-hour course. And I view the trainings as very similarly to how I view education. Again, I have 2 BA degrees. When I got out of college, I was really proud of that. And when I hit the world, I found out that those degrees were nice and looked good in the paper, but they paled by comparison to the folks who had experience in the real world. And those were the folks who I learned the most from. And the reason I say that is, of all the peer support specialists we employ, we've actually more often hired people who have the skills to do the job we need done and get them the training after the fact, as opposed to hiring people just because they have the peer support certification already. I think that's one of the reasons why we have had success with this, because if you're really going to be a professional organization, you have to hire the best people. And in behavioral health, very, very often, the best people have no clue that there even is a peer support certification, much less how to get it. One of the other things that's critical is, once you have somebody go through that training and you have somebody on staff, continuing education is just vital. The state of Louisiana requires peer support specialists to get 10 CEUs a year. NAMI St. Tammany requires that they get 12, and we do all of ours in person. We offer in-person CEU opportunities once a month, and and we used to invite people who were peer support specialists in the area to come in, whether we employed them or not. We had to stop that for COVID. I'm happy to say that as of next month, we're reopening that opportunity to peer specialists in our area. So the continuing education, I think, is as important as the initial training, but it really is the quality of the person hired that makes the success.
Well said. Thank you. This is a question for Judge Zornbrecher. It's a question about AOT, and do people need to have the competency to participate in AOT? And, how do you experience that? As you know, some people may struggle with awareness or insight. The medical term for that is anosognosia. So a couple questions about that, Your Honor, and how does that play out in the courtroom?
Well, for AOT, it's all statutorily driven. In other words, you follow the statute in your jurisdiction. The model is called, I believe, Nicola's Law, and I can't remember whether it started in San Francisco or in New York, that the Louisiana law was modeled after, and our law is very specific. It says that in order to qualify for a order, the patient must be, of course, 18 years old, suffering from a mental illness, unlikely to safely survive in the community without supervision based on a clinical determination. And then there are some very specific things in our statute. They have to at least twice in the last 36 months been hospitalized for treatment where mental illness is a significant factor, or resulting in an emergency certificate. This is a process, it's like a temporary commitment where they go in, or commit one or more acts of serious violence toward another within the last 36 hours as a result of mental illness. And here's one of the stoppers. The patient, as a result of mental illness, is unlikely to voluntarily participate in the recommended treatment or the recommended treatment plan. So if they've tried a lot of things before and it hadn't worked, this is at least a court order. And we're trying, we've got a lot of different providers that are, we're developing our treatment plans and how they're going to be documented and how they're going to be approved. And frankly, it being a civil proceeding and everyone must be represented, that they can't represent themselves.
That's right.
Mental health advocates, attorneys who represent them, and they do represent them. So, that's who has their back, so to speak, from the legal standpoint. But it's very difficult. It's tough. Every patient in AOT is a real challenge.
But it sounds like you've come to the conclusion that it can really make a difference for some people in very specific situations.
It can, and it will, but it's a never ending process from what I've seen. Yeah. And it's we're early on in it, but people get better in behavioral health, and they understand that they have to take their medication and they have to get their periodic treatment. And in AOT, every day is a struggle. Every single time we see them, it could be different today than it was yesterday, and different tomorrow than it was today. So it's a real challenge, and we've got a lot of dedicated people who really want to help these people, but
yes,
it's been a tough go so far.
Thank you, Judge. What about a different question? I'm going to shift gears. Crisis response. So when it's police officers, I know they're trained, but are they also wearing traditional police uniforms? There was a couple questions on that issue, and how much of that is done by mental health practitioners. Does it vary at all? Nick, looks like you want to take that one, and thank you.
Yeah. So a couple of different things. Obviously, every community is different, right? So, and selling certain things to certain departments is easier and harder depending on where you live. Our crisis intervention team started in 2016, and as the judge mentioned, what they did is not only do we do CIT training annually, in addition to that, they have 4 officers dedicated just to behavioral health calls. Up until recently, it's certainly something that I pushed for and advocated for, was to have them in plain clothes and unmarked units. And that is something that will be happening soon. Certainly the goal, while it didn't happen right out of the gate, obviously there's a process to all this, right? We kind of, just like in the mental health role, we meet people where they are. Well, the same thing applies when I'm working with an agency. I have to meet them where they are, and we have to work together. To the next point of other crisis services, there's actually, so again, just like the rest of the country, especially during COVID, there's funding going towards mobile crisis services. And of course, we don't want law enforcement interacting with people with serious mental illness any more than law enforcement wants to interact with serious mental illness. So our goal is to, as Mary mentioned earlier, 2 of the primary goals of Safe Haven are, in fact, jail diversion and ER diversion. So of all the systems that we build here, we're trying to divert and reach people before crisis. So to answer the question, no, we're not quite there yet. with officers. They're still in their uniforms. They are moving to unmarked cars, and we've had conversations with dressing down. And the second part is mobile crisis will be rolling, and we do have social workers stationed in our ERs and that as well. So hopefully long term, I always say I love working with CIT, but my long-term goal is to eliminate the need for CIT. It really is. So I hope that answers your question.
That's a great answer. It really speaks to the developmental nature of this work, right? Now I want to go back to Tom's commentary about the hospital, because several comments are, in my state, the hospital is not recovery, peer, support oriented. So my question, I'm going to work off that observation. My hospital is in the dark ages is one of the comments. And so the question is, maybe Tom could take this on. Mary, of course, you'd be another great candidate. Was the culture of recovery, putting people first, is that directly related to the outcome and the process you're working on? Because the culture seemed to be pretty well established in a very good direction before the hospital was closed. So is that related? Is it tangential? Is it luck? Tom and Mary.
Well, that's an interesting question. And really, Southeast Louisiana Hospital was an interesting laboratory to watch this process take place. The relationship, and again, a lot of this, as Nick said earlier, so much of this goes back to relationships. And NAMI St. Tammany had established a very, very close relationship with Southeast Louisiana Hospital because the NAMI chapter here was so invested, the families were so invested in attempting to get good treatment processes for their family members. And since Southeast Louisiana Hospital was located smack dab in the middle of St. Tammany Parish, it was easy to have that face-to-face relationship. The CEO of Southeast Louisiana Hospital at this time was a marvelous woman by the name of Pat Gonzalez, who was a social worker. And as an LCSW, she had a different outlook on operations than possibly a medical doctor director would have. And so she's more receptive to the idea of the recovery model and the other SAMHSA information than possibly somebody with MD after their name would have been. And again, that's not a nasty comment about people whose first name are doctor. It's just
no offense taken, Tom. We're good.
Yeah, I just want to make sure here, Dr. Duckworth.
No, we're good. Tom, you and I are good.
Okay. But actually, because of that, the hospital was essentially told to embrace this model
by the leadership of the hospital, by the social worker.
By the leadership.
Yes.
And it was not embraced overnight.
Yes.
Another reason why it's great to watch, another strength of Southeastern Hospital and why it was so great to work there, Southeast was a teaching hospital. Consequently, they had 8, 10 doctors who were on the various units in partnership with Tulane University. And those doctors would bring in each quarter a different resident and a different set of interns. And therefore, you had a whole set of new docs coming in being trained who suddenly were being exposed to this recovery model by doctors who maybe themselves had never implemented it on their own. And out of those 10 doctors who were the primary caregivers in the hospital, I would say probably 8 of them embraced the recovery model totally by the time my 4 years there was done and the hospital closed. But 2 of them, quite frankly, never did. And they always continued with the medical model in treatment team, even though in the teaching part of their jobs, they would talk about the recovery model and why it was important.
So briefly, Tom, I'm going to make a statement. The medical model, as you're describing it, is the doctor knows best, tells the patient what to do, and expects them to comply. And in this conversation, the recovery model puts the person with the illness at the center of the conversation, and they help to create their own recovery plan. Have I described this accurately?
Accurately and succinctly.
Oh, that's an unusual thing. We should all buy lottery tickets perhaps today. That would be a first. Tom, so you see the leadership of the hospital, the closure of the hospital, and the creation of this community collaboration to be really a culture that was evolving over time, that also involved the young doctors, because every time you have a resident, you have a young doctor who's going to be influenced, right?
Absolutely correct. And one of the most rewarding things to me personally is to encounter psychiatrists in the field today, whether they're working for the coroner in private practice or back at the hospital, who were trained at the time that I was there. It's just a wonderful thing, because those people really do embrace the recovery model and show that this was possible.
There's a couple questions about budget. So I'm going to ask Mary this question. There was a state hospital that was closed when I was the commissioner of mental health in Massachusetts, and the suburban neighborhood wanted to turn it into a soccer field. It said no help for anyone, right? This 150-year legacy of service to a very specific group of people. I think the Department of Mental Health attempted to get some percentage of the revenue, and other ones have had some housing on it for people who live with mental health conditions, but it was an abject failure, right? Soccer fields in these wealthy suburban areas. How did you pull this off? You, the community, Mary, the spokesperson, because you're using this same land to create a multi-party collaboration in the service of the same mission.
Absolutely. I'd love to answer that question. So I think a couple of things worked in our favor. Number one is that it was so large, 292 acres. I mean, really, in reality, there's not a whole lot around it. One, there is recreation district that's next to it, and across the street is a state park, excuse me. So in that area, there's not a lot of residential homeowners in that area. When the state announced that it was going to close, it was going to sell it in the open market. So it could have been a subdivision or a soccer field or anything else. And that's why parish government initially purchased it. Initially, we weren't thinking about bringing it into this evolution. Initially, we were just going to resell it but have restrictions, so it only could be healthcare, to try to at least preserve some type of services. And I think my perspective differs a little with Tom. I don't know, I can't speak for them because they're not here anymore, but those who bought it, it was more about just preserving services. It really wasn't about the model. We just knew if we lost services, we're going to lose treatment, right? And that was going to negatively affect people from our perspective. So when we purchased the property, actually one of our judges, Judge Swartz, came to the administration and said, I don't know if you know what you have, what this 292 acres can be. So they went to San Antonio and looked at Haven for Hope, which works with homelessness, kind of that one-stop shop kind of idea. So after they came back from it, we had our leaders said, we're going to do it, but we're going to do it for behavioral health. So without that intervention and that relationship between parish government administration and the court, this may never have happened. But I do think, and I'll say we are very, other organizations are looking to come on to Safe Haven, who are looking to relocate to the North Shore because of our zoning and because they're not going to get a fight. We have these 292 acres. The parish owns thousands of wetlands around it. Also, we have that recreation district and state park. So it really helped us in that particular situation. But I guess my thing would be, if you're in that situation, really talk to people. They can put restrictions when it is sold. You know, government entities can do that. So that is an option to hopefully that doesn't happen in the future.
Well, Mary, it's a great story, and it speaks to the kind of clarity of purpose of a local group of leaders, which is a pretty great message for everyone who's attending this webinar. This wasn't magic from above. This was community organization and clarity of purpose. I want to ask the last question, which may not be ready for prime time, but it also anticipates our next webinar on juveniles. And, you know, Dr. Ross Green will be talking about the juvenile to, you know, the youth to juvenile detention pipeline and how to interrupt that. And we're doing that next month. So how young do your services go? Have you thought about youth and adolescents through this creative lens? And, or is that in the to-do list?
So currently on campus, we do have services from our public health school system. They actually have 4 alternative schools right now on our campus, as well as we have Methodist Children's Home, which is a residential program for boys between under the age of 12. And in the future, we do know the youth is where we need to go. Unfortunately, when we talked about our high suicide rate, that also includes our children and adolescents. And we've unfortunately seen that here in our community. So definitely going to the youth. And I think it's important not just having the crisis services, but closer outpatient services. So right now, we live about an hour across Lake Pontchartrain to New Orleans. So a lot of our community members actually have to travel great distances sometimes to receive services. So talking about relocating, maybe not the whole treatment, but maybe part of it, maybe an outpatient program can be over here so that our citizens can have access to that same great care, including our adolescents. And I think, Nick, you might, I don't know if you want to add.
Anybody else want to take on that
question? I don't think I've ever been scared to jump in on any question. I mean, I think, you know, to be honest, when we were building this, I mean, yeah, we knew there, you know, there's certainly a need with youth and adolescents and adults. And I think one of the honest decisions was it was just easier to tackle the system with adults. And I think the reality is that's why we went there first, because you know, we've got all the, you've got judges and law enforcement and parish government, all these people. And I can tell you as an advocate, I mean, we're scared the whole time because we want this to succeed. We knew it needed to succeed. So going with adults first had to happen. But especially, you know, with youth in our community, you know, Mary's right. Traveling an hour across the lake to New Orleans is the short distance. We have people that are, you know, hospitalized across the state 4 and 5 hours away with no family support whatsoever. And that is obviously not the way that we want to see services delivered to youth and adolescents in our community. So I can tell you now that, you know, our big focus as the Crisis Receiving Center opens certainly is working with parish government and the other partners to make sure that we not only address the adolescent crisis services, but the full wraparound services, because we have them, right? A lot of states have them. We just to be able to put them together and have them on the same campus and all talking together. And that's where our focus will be in the coming years.
Thank you. So that's an extension of the remarkable community vision that you have arranged. So I'm going to thank you all for this extraordinary community engagement, creativity, and outcome. It's really something to marvel at. So I just want to thank each of you. Mary, Your Honor, Nick, and Tom. And just you know that NAMI community is very grateful for you and your leadership. And you are available for being in touch with people to teach them what you've learned about putting something together. And with that, I'm going to turn this back over to our CEO, Dan Gillison.
All right, thank you very much, Ken, and thank you to Tom, Mary, the judge, and Nick. We appreciate it very much. We want to make sure you save the dates for the upcoming events, the 17th of June, 15th of July, and the 12th of August. And those will all be at the same time. And the first will feature Dr. Ross Green. The next one will be Dr. Sydney Hankerson. And the third will be Dr. Judith. And these are our summer sessions. We want to also remind you of our convention, bringing people together for mental health. The time is now. We've heard a lot of people in this space say, you know, mental health is having a moment. Well, we want it to become a movement, and this may be that window of opportunity to do it. We'd love you to join us for our convention on the 27th and 28th of July, and you can register at nami.org/convention. Last but not least, we encourage you to donate to NAMI. We are a not-for-profit. We're able to do this work as a result of your contributions. And for those that are already doing it, thank you. For those that haven't, we welcome your donations and contributions. And we appreciate all that you do in your communities in terms of mental health and helping loved ones. With that, what I'd like to do in closing is to really thank our production team, because our production team really makes these series happen. And as I do that, let me also say this is the first time that we decided to do a series. We did a 4-part series on Help, Not Handcuffs. And this is a wonderful way to close it out with the team from St. Tammany Parish. And so wonderful to have them close it out. We started with a judge and we're wrapping up with a judge. So thank you, Judge, for joining us. With that said, the staff, Jordan Miller, Terry Brister, Jesse Wathel, and Christina Bott. This is not possible. When we pull the curtains back and turn the lights up and we start, this wouldn't happen without your support and you managing everything in the background and making this happen. So thank you to the staff for what you do. To all of you, we hope you have a wonderful close to your week and a great weekend. And remember, register for the convention, NAMI convention, NAMI-Con, July 27th and 28th. And register as soon as you can. We look forward to seeing you there. All the best to everyone. Be safe and take care. Bye now.